everybody for coming. We opted not to do speakers. In terms of technology, Megan and Kevin assured me that they are allowed speakers as well. So hopefully our furthest person in the back, Ty and Erica, can hear me, and we'll be able to hear Megan and Kevin as they come up. Thank you everybody for registering ahead of time. That's always helpful for us when we plan events and food and things like that. So thank you. My name is Matt Harrington. I have the pleasure and honor of serving as the Executive Director of the Southwestern Vermont Chamber. I think I know almost everybody here, or at least we've been in some event or room together, so thank you. This is always a great time for us to start to prep for the new year. I'm sure you're all doing that in your own organization, and so as we start to think about what are the governmental policy law impacts of 2026, we always want to make sure that we invite our partners over at the Vermont Chamber down to Bennington or Manchester. Sometimes we host it to update us and let us know what to plan for. I do want to give a big thank you to Maru, the staff here at Mount Anthony Country Club. Round of applause. Never disappointed. They do a great job at the grill here. I also want to acknowledge our legislators in the room. We have Senator Seth Bongartz right up here in front. We have Representative Mary Morrissey, Representative Greer, Representative Nigro. Am I missing any other people? I just may not have seen you walk in, but I think we covered everybody. So thank you for your service, and look forward to having you all get back up to the State House in January. I also want to acknowledge our board members here that are on the chamber board. If you could just raise your hand. We've got a few here, so we really appreciate you attending these events, showing your support. We always like to communicate to our members that you elect these directors. These directors then tell myself and our staff kind of what to do next. And so as we will have the election ballot come out this new year for our 2026 board and officers, please, give that some thought. And also, as you saw those hands raised, it's not just me up here. These are people you can approach and talk about many initiatives and things that are going on at the chamber level, but also at the economic and business level too. Finally, I'll just talk briefly about some events coming up, and then I do want to pass it off to our guests. Next week, we have the Heart of the Shire's nonprofit brunch. I believe we're just about sold out at that one. We're not accepting anybody else, but again, if you were to pay Erica a little bit more money, I'm sure she would be able to get you in there. I know it's a hot event to get to. We're excited to kind of do a brunch, a different style of event for us over at Park McCullough, and we've got some great awards to give out and a keynote speaker there. That's November 5th. We have a deep dive coming up. Deep dive is where we really kind of go into a workshop style deeper dive into some topics that are relevant. This one is on Vermont labor laws, which should be important to most people in this room, especially if you have staff. So that will be that's going to be November 13th, so a couple weeks from now, over in Arlington at the Community House. We have a Power Hour, our annual employee benefits. Our Power Hours are digital. So again, if, hey, I'm Matt, I can't get out to the event, we do provide some Zoom-based call-ins. It's 1 hour, and we listen to employee benefits, healthcare, what should we expect for healthcare coming up, as well as dental, vision, and some of the perks that you get with your membership at the chamber. And then finally, one that we always look forward to as we ring in the season, our holiday Mix and Mingle, which is up at the Barrows House this year, and that'll be on December 9th. That's all over on our website, so please, register, get your tickets as you've done so great here today.
Matt,
yes.
Just clarify, the deep dive law is happening here.
Oh, sorry, yes, this one, the deep dive is happening at the Country Club. Correct. All right, without further ado, we do want to welcome our guest here from the Vermont Chamber. We have Megan Sullivan, VP of Government Affairs. Megan has been with us for many, many years, bringing information down from the Hill, down from the epicenter into all over. I know you guys are doing kind of a road show, and Megan confirms for me that this is always the first stop they
always
make.
Number one.
Bennington or Manchester, the Southwest region, so we really appreciate Megan leading the charge on that. We're welcoming back Kevin Chu. I've had the great pleasure of meeting Kevin many, many years ago, and at this point, and if you don't know Kevin, he's the executive director of the Vermont Futures Project, which is a fascinating foundation, fascinating nonprofit that studies the data, the macro data of Vermont, and how that kind of leads into some of the initiatives that the Chamber oversees. So welcome back, Kevin. We're going to hear from both Megan and Kevin today. I do also want to acknowledge Jeremy Little, who's in the audience. He's with the Vermont Chamber Policy and Outreach. And we also have Josh from Special Counsel as well here. So welcome to all of you. Welcome to Bennington. Without further ado, we'll have Megan. I think you're coming up first, and then Kevin after. Great. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much. Now, you may be wondering where our fearless leader, Amy Spear, is. Amy is fearless, which, sometimes means when you're out mountain biking and you get a bite, you don't go to the doctors right away and then need to go a few days later when you're like, well, is that a red circle around that bite? So Amy wishes she could be here, but she does have to just make sure that she takes care of whatever that tick bite might be, so she's here in spirit with us, and as an incredibly important part of our team, not just as our president of the organization, really setting the path of where we're going, but she works on tax policy for our team. Just a quick anecdote, before she became president, she was vice president of tourism for the Vermont Chamber, which meant she got to work on things like beer and liquor and outdoor recreation. So when she became president, it was like, all right, Amy, now you have to not just do fun things. You're going to have to, you get healthcare or tax policy, and she took tax policy, so I get healthcare, and I think both of us are in a lot of fun for the upcoming year with both of those topics. So, really appreciate the opportunity to be here and be with all of you. As Matt said, this is always our first stop on our legislative roadshow. As a statewide Chamber of Commerce, we operate a little bit differently than your regional chamber, and Matt is here with you and his team every day in, day out, helping you with the local matters, making sure you're connected, and as your statewide chamber, we're in Montpelier for you, but bringing all of your stories. What is it like to run a business in Bennington County, in the Northeast Kingdom, in Washington County, in Windham County? What is it that you're all dealing with that we want to make sure the folks in Montpelier know about? Because you have great representation in this county, but these folks aren't in all the committees that the issues that may be impacting your business are on. So we want to make sure that if there's something going on in a committee where you don't have a direct line to a legislator, we're still talking about why this matters to businesses in your county. So it's a great partnership that we have with all of the regional counties around the state, and I think especially strong down here in Bennington County. So appreciate the partnership that's really developed there. So last year when we were here, Kevin was talking about the upcoming Economic Action Plan, and now hopefully you all have received, we actually have the Economic Action Plan. This is really exciting, and we've got the full plan and then the one-pager, so you can have your tweet and your reel, the whole story, or just the short version to get what you need. But this is really a data-driven or data-informed look at how do we move Vermont to a really prosperous future? How do we get the population that we need, the homes that we need, this people and places framework? And Kevin's going to be talking about that today. But what we're doing with that, though, is there are so many reports that get published that can then just sit on a wall. And that is not the goal of the Economic Action Plan. Action is a really important part of that title. So we're taking the plan and putting it into how does that drive the Vermont Chamber's policy agenda, and how do we create our policy agenda to make progress in the upcoming year and years. And so there's ideas throughout the plan of here are some areas that if you want to drive the data in a different direction than where it's going, here's some policy ideas you can work towards. And so our policy agenda this year is really looking at how do we move that into an actionable stage. Matt introduced our team. So at the State House, every day, come January, I think 6th is the first day of the session this year, until adjournment, which last year was well into June. Hopefully this year is a little shorter. Our team is there. I head up our team as the Vice President of Government Affairs and cover a lot of issues. Jeremy Little is our policy associate, so he's there with me every day. If I'm in the State House, he's in the State House, and he also runs our intern program. So Jeremy and I are not enough to cover everything that's going on in the State House that has to deal with the economy. If you think of all of the areas that touch the economy, that touch your businesses, we need to be in all of those rooms. And so we have a very robust internship program that Jeremy runs. We have 8 interns every session, 2 in person every day. They're in there to make sure we know what's happening, but they're also in there because they sit in a room with a label that says Vermont Chamber of Commerce. And they're sitting in the room, and legislators know when that intern is in there, the Vermont Chamber of Commerce is paying attention to what's happening in that room. We care about the issues that they're talking about. Our interns aren't going to speak for us, but they're in there so that people know that we're there and that we know what's happening at all times. So as you can imagine, these are 19 and 20-year-olds. So Jeremy actually was a former intern, so he knows what it's like very well, but haranguing 8 20-year-olds is no easy feat. So I especially am very happy to have him there with us. Amy Spear, who again is not here, she works on our tax policy, so she'll be working a lot this year as there's a lot that's going to be happening around our fiscal reality. And Josh Diamond joined our team last year. He's a special counsel who's working with us on technology issues. This is sort of a new format we tried last year, and I think it works really well. There are some issues that are very, very technical, and my brain can only hold so much technical information. So he's been working with us on issues around AI and data privacy, and he can really dig into the legislative language and know legally, what does this mean? How are we going to comply? What are the challenges here? I can talk about what's facing the Vermont business community, and he can come in with some real important information around the legal framework. So he'll be talking a little bit later as we dive into that issue. And one thing I want to mention, the session starts in January. We have, it is in ink, but it is also changeable. Part of what we love about coming here first is the input that we get from this business community. So one thing I'm going to be asking is whether it's within one of the pillars I talk about or whether it's completely outside of that. What are we missing? What's really impacting your business that we're not thinking about? And is that coming from Montpelier that we need to be working on? Are there things that are coming from that are coming down federally that we need to make sure Montpelier understands? Like, listen, we know you don't control this, but the impact that it has is significant, and it's going to impact what you're doing here. You raise this tax, also know that these things are creating a lot of pressures over here to really break down those silos. So I'm hoping to get some of that feedback today of what are those things that are challenging your business, your organization, that we need to bring a voice to that maybe we're not doing right now. So with that was supposed to be Amy's speech. I'm hoping I covered it all. But I think without further ado, we're just going to jump into the 4 pillars that we're really going to be focused on this year. And because this is all framed in the Economic Action Plan, I'm going to have Kevin start off with each one, talking about why this area is important.
Thanks, Megan. Hello, everyone. My name is Kevin, Executive Director of the Vermont Futures Project. You have in front of you a copy of the Economic Action Plan, so I'm not going to be reading it word for word, but I will be referencing some information in there as we go. The first pillar that we're going to be covering is economic abundance through fiscal stewardship. So our state budget has grown over the past 5 years from $5.8 billion up to $9.1 billion. right? I'll say those numbers one more time. 5.8 up to 9.1. Our population hasn't grown by much, which means to raise that level of revenue, it's an increased tax burden on the folks who are already here. And yes, there has been federal funds in recent years, but we know the volatility of that and the long-term implications of continuing to raise spending, right, means that eventually that will impact the affordability for Vermonters. So part of what we cover in the Economic Action Plan, beyond just describing the shifting demographics, how that impacts workforce and the tax base, is also issuing recommendations around fiscal stewardship, living within our means. And when we take a look at examples from other states, right, because it's okay to take a look at good ideas from elsewhere, then adapt them to a Vermont context, what we see are states that have taxpayer bill of rights, or they anchor spending and revenue growth to the level of population growth, so that there's a reasonable relationship between the two. So in the short term, Vermont needs to be a little bit more responsible with how we spend, but in the long term, we also need to be keeping an eye on how we're growing that tax base, how we're growing the population, how we're growing the workforce. Those things have to happen in tandem. It's not an either or. And that's part of what we outline in the Economic Action Plan, is there have to be both efficiency strategies and expansion strategies simultaneously. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Megan.
So that led us to our first pillar of economic abundance through fiscal stewardship. So we're really looking at, I think affordability is a term that everyone talks about a lot, and sort of what does that mean? What does affordability mean? And I think for us, we're really talking about how can we have a prosperous future for every Vermonter? How can our downtown businesses ensure that they're able to employ someone who's also able to have a house here, and saying that if you work for a downtown business, you can't then afford to buy a home. Just saying, well, the wages are too low is missing the idea of, okay, but how much has the cost of housing grown? How much has the cost of healthcare grown that has made those wages, which in Vermont have grown substantially in the last 5 years, no longer enough to be able to have that middle cross stream? And so the first thing we're going to look at is making sure that there is transparency and fiscal stewardship when we're setting our budgets and when we're talking about tax policy. We were very concerned recently. There was a Vermont Public article about the estate tax and how much money is coming in to the state from the estate tax. And there were some folks quoted in there that were like, this is amazing. We got to tap into this and make sure we're getting as much as we can. Like, at this point, we're celebrating the death of Vermont. Like, that's how that felt to me. Like, we're not talking about how do we bring more into the state so that we're lowering the cost for everybody, but we're focused on the future life of Vermont. Instead, it's, all right, how do we make the most out of the death of Vermont? That is just such the wrong framework. So we're going to spend a lot of time in our taxing committees this year really talking about, are we focused on taxing policy that is guided in a principled way that is shown to actually grow the tax base. So we're not just taxing the same people more, finding more pockets to pull from, but how are we creating tax policy that drives a thriving economy? So Amy will be leading our charge on that front. Bless her heart. And, and it's going to be really an important one for us to be part of. We're also really challenged, and I'd love to hear from some of your businesses about the benefits cliff. Vermont, I think, does a wonderful job of supporting our most vulnerable citizens. But we know in that support, we've also created some challenging cliffs, that if you have an employee who you'd love to see promoted, you'd love to see come on full time, they're saying, well, when my wages go up that high, I lose my housing. It's not like I get less for my housing. I'm going to lose my housing. I'm going to lose my subsidies for X, Y, and Z. And it becomes a real challenge for somebody to say, how do I create the economic prosperity for my future family, for myself and my future, get out of a cycle of poverty when I'm really attached and fearful because of how much support I get. The idea isn't, well, we need to take that support away, but we need to create a better path for people to make sure that they can create that economic opportunity for themselves without sort of having that rug pulled out from under them. So we're going to be talking this year about the benefits cliff, as it's called, and looking at, you know, where those cliffs are and how we can smooth those edges a bit to really help people through. And, you know, and this again, looking at programs. How are our programs being run in a way that supports that development? I think a lot of times we talk about, you know, well, we have to work with our legislators on this. And we have great legislators, so we're glad to work with them. Part of what we're going to be starting to do a lot more of is, how do we push on the administration about this? How do we make sure that the people who are working in our programs are doing so in a customer service way? If you are running a regulatory program, are you providing customer service and not a door in the face and saying no? And while it's good to talk to our legislators about that, we can't put that on them. We need to be really working with our agencies and the administration to say, you know, what are the guidelines that you're putting in place? If our legislators pass 2 pages of statutory language and you pass 20 pages of guidelines that provide a lot of opportunity for no, sorry, no, that's not going to work, that's a problem. And so, you know, part of what our team is really starting to look at is not only how do we work with legislators in Montpelier, but how do we really dig into some of those pieces so that that fiscal cliff isn't a door in the face, but making sure that people have that opportunity within state government to say, okay, how can we work through this? How do we get to yes, so that you can still be protected and get that fiscal benefit that you need as you're working through these economic opportunities. So again, if there are stories about this, I would love to hear them, and I'm sure the legislators in the room would love to hear them too, about challenges you've had with employees being able to take that next step in their career. And also in the idea of affordability. You know, what are those challenges, those pressures that you're feeling in your business right now that are making it hard to grow and invest? No one's ready to talk yet. I'm gonna keep talking. Okay.
And we'll have some time for open discussion at the end too. I'll add a couple more points to really reemphasize what Megan said in terms of the benefits cliff. I think a general principle that most people can agree on is individuals shouldn't be penalized financially or economically if they want to advance in their careers, if they want to increase their wages and grow as a person, right? And sometimes the policies or processes we have in the place actually do penalize that personal development and growth. So how do we center our core principles and design around that? In terms of affordability, right? Affordability is a two-sided equation, and it's also a relative measure. And when we look nationwide, Vermont is actually doing quite well on the wages side of the equation. This was something that kind of surprised me when I looked at the data, because having grown up in Vermont, a story I was told over and over is, oh, Vermont is not competitive on wages. But we're in the top 20, in recent years, 17th to 19th in terms of highest median household income. Where we're falling short in that affordability equation is on the cost of living side. We're in the bottom 10 in terms of cost of living, meaning we're one of the most expensive states. So the wages you earn here don't go as far as they do in other places, but that is inherently solvable. So as we think about what comes next, the advocacy pillar I want to shift to is regulatory modernization and predictability. So to anchor this conversation, I'll start by saying the Cato Institute did a study across the US to rank states by regulatory freedom, and Vermont ranked 43rd overall. And when we think about some of the long-term goals of the Economic Action Plan around growth of our working age population, growth in terms of the number of homes that we need in our communities, we want to be able to set those long-term quantifiable goals and then ask, does our regulatory environment, do our policies allow us to achieve those goals? And if not, how do we start to redesign or reconfigure the policy environment to allow us to reach those goals? The state of Vermont, there was a housing needs assessment that found over the next 5 years, we need about 40,000 new housing units. Currently, we build about 2,500 units per year, right? We need to triple that rate in order to hit that 5-year goal. And hitting that 5-year goal allows us to have the level of population growth that starts to grow the tax base, starts to bring in younger folks so that we can fill up our schools again and rebalance the equation when it comes to healthcare, who's paying into it, who's utilizing services. I often hear the phrase, housing is a human right. So if housing's a human right, then it should be right to build housing. But in many cases, when there's a proposal put forth, the default answer is no. And you have to go through this laborious process, which can take 2, 3, 4, 5 years before a shovel ever hits the ground, if that ever happens, right? So how do we, again, redesign or reconfigure our policy and regulatory environment such that we can actually achieve some of the long-term goals that we see the data are clearly pointing to? Megan.
So when it comes to what we're talking about in Montpelier this year, this is going to continue to be a piece. We've been part of the Act 250 updates to Act 250 that started 4 years ago, 3 years ago. It's been going on for a long time, but there was actual progress made in a bill that came out 2 years ago, and that process is underway of, all right, how do we actually turn this process from a well, it depends on the size of the development to, okay, where do we want to build? How do we get out of the way in the areas we want to build to allow that to happen? And then where there are areas where there needs that extra protection, where do we do that? So we've been at the table for those conversations consistently, and we'll continue to do that. And we'll be looking this year to see, okay, we passed a massive bill. How do we make sure that it's working as intended, that we're still working towards those ultimate goals that we had? And I think another piece on that, and I'm glad that we have Oliver Subaru in the room, because another piece is, how are we treating things differently? If we're talking about a redevelopment project, or this is saying, this project's going to clean up a brownfield. We're not cutting new. We're not saying build, we're going to build a new space and cut down trees, but we're going to take an existing property and revamp it and bring it back to life. And by the way, it's in an area that has already got development around it. If that type of project is treated the same as a greenfield project in terms of its environmental impact, we're missing something. So how do we ensure that when we're doing redevelopment, that there is actually an incentive? Because I can tell you, if you go to other states and you're going to do a redevelopment project, it is like, thank you, come on in. I mean, oftentimes any development project gets that treatment, but let's say especially that redevelopment. We're so thankful, here's a grant to do X, Y, and Z. We may not even be asking for a grant this year, but just saying, how do we ensure that if someone wants to redevelop, whether it's for housing or for commercial or industrial, because we need housing, we also need jobs and great businesses who are located here, that we're allowing for that process to happen in a way that supports that development and doesn't micromanage it to the point of a greenfield development around important natural resources. So how do we change that out? And I think Act 250 gets sort of a boogeyman status in the state, and in some cases it's justified for the process that people have to go through. And then in some cases, we're also hiding some pretty other challenging processes. So, we're talking to members who are dealing with a lot of challenges coming out of the Department of Public Safety and the Fire Division, with how rules are now being interpreted that they've never been interpreted, and hotels are getting shut down that have been following the same codes that were in place. Nothing has changed except the person has changed. We really need to get at all right, what is the regulatory framework that is holding growth back, or that is creating an environment in Vermont where people are saying, I just can't do business here anymore. I can't do it anymore. We're going to be really looking at how do we fix rather than add. And there's a lot that's in place right now. We have a lot of regulation in place. How do we fix what's going on without adding? Last year, I testified on a labor bill for the right to sit. So the employee, we're going to mandate that an employee has a right to sit down. Okay. Well, what does that mean? The business has to provide a chair for every employee when they can sit when they want? Doesn't VOSHA already allow for accommodation? Well, you have a one-person complaint. Like, okay, well, great, one person complained that they didn't have a chair when they wanted to. We're going to create a new mandate on employers saying every employee has the right to sit and it's a $100 fine when they don't get to. Is that per sitting opportunity? Is that per day? Like, what are we? And if we've already regulated that, then send that constituent to the governing body. Don't create a new law around it. And I think we get some of that. There are folks who want to do a lot of good, and so it's, well, let's put a new bill in. Okay, well, before we put a new bill in, let's see what's already happening in that field, because I guarantee that right to sit would have caused a lot more problems than it would have caused solutions in terms of, you getting that newsletter, Monday Matters comes, and you're like, wait a minute, what? How do I, Matt, how do I comply with this?
Buy more seats.
Well, you come to our labor law.
Brings whole new meeting to chair the
Yeah.
committee.
So when we're talking about regulatory reform, it's got to come, I think we have to look holistically. We can talk a lot about Act 250 for housing, but we do need to keep talking about the wetlands program that A&R runs and some of the serious challenges that we're seeing that cause housing development in the state. Some of the continued challenges around local permitting and challenges when, if a community says no to housing, but they say, yes, give me all the infrastructure dollars for broadband and roads and public transportation. Like, well, you can't say yes to those state dollars, but then say, no, well, we don't want housing here. So we're going to be doing a lot of work around not just how do we make sure the state is accountable, but how do we make sure our community is accountable to helping us reach our goals, and looking at our regulatory process through that. Curtis, did you have one?
For the legislators that are here, okay, we thank God for the people that we have representing us from the business development and the chamber. Thank you. You and I have had countless conversations here, but for those of you that are unaware in the Bennington area, we're the fortunate ones. Okay, we had a recent conversation up in Rutland where there are people who are significantly more prevented from trying to do good things for the community than we are. In our particular situation, which I'm very well versed on, is the fact that you're reading here, and one of the things that I love about what the chamber is doing is they're talking about very specific things, regulatory modernization and predictability. There are laws in place, and I live in Vermont because I'm a green person, right? I love fresh air. I love the fact that there's no trash. I'm involved in Green Up Day. I'm involved in all that stuff, and I love it. However, as Governor Scott says, we don't necessarily have a taxation problem, we have a people problem. Well, if you're preventing development in a reasonable manner, with reasonable controls, with unpredictable, non-statute driven authority with individuals who are well outside the statutes being able to prevent projects from moving forward, it is a huge problem. to the tune of our little company, it's me and Jose. That's it. It's two guys who grew up from nothing, who put everything in on a dream. We're already $890,000 that we don't have to fight through regulatory processes that aren't based on statutes, that are based on how one person feels. I cannot make this up. That cannot continue if we want Vermont to survive. There are statutes that are written. Instead of writing new bills, how about we enforce the ones and have everybody who's involved in enforcing these statutes be held to the statute. Period. We're good. Love Act 250. Love it. Love A&R. No problem with it. Stick to the statutes. Stop having these particular individuals be able to be power-hungry people like the Gecko commercial with a librarian and the sign dispensers. It is just that simple. Spin the sign when you feel like it. Turn it around when you don't. $890,000, if that was your money that you're putting up for a project that went from $9 million to $14 million in 2 years, would you stay here or go to New Hampshire? Because New Hampshire is begging us to come. All we want to do is employ 25 more people and take a contaminated site and make something reasonable there to better my guests, because I want to give them unreasonable hospitality at my Subaru store and at my Ford store. That's all I have.
Yeah. And I think,
Thank you for what
well, I think those stories are really important, right? Because I can go in and say, you know, this is not, Act 250 is causing all these problems. What's the specific? You know, what are the real challenges? And I think that's important. Flexibility can be helpful, right? Saying like, you know, if you've got if we're talking Act 250, if you've got a district coordinator whose attitude is, how do we get to yes? All right, what do we need to do to make sure that we're complying with the intent of the law, with the letter of the law? But we want to get to yes, because this is a great employer. We want them to stay and grow in Vermont, and we want this contaminated site cleaned up, and we don't want the state to have to do it. So if he wants to pay for it, great. Let's have a parade. And if that flexibility is instead being used to say, nope, you know, I don't like this particular light color you've picked. I'd like you to pick a different light color, but you're probably going to need to hire an engineer to say what the impact of these different light colors are. And, you know, there's no evidence that there is a bat at this place, but it's a contaminated old site. I feel like maybe there could be a bat here. You should probably have a study done and wait to demolish.
For a study, there's no damn bat.
So you shouldn't demolish when you need to demolish, because maybe there could be a bat that wants to winter there in the future. Like, yeah, but
It's in writing.
what about when it's a new space that we're not going to be letting bats? Anyway, so
Another specific around Act 250 is not just the pleasure of the review, but the cost of the review. So our cancer,
$500.
yeah, exactly. Our cancer center is north of $65,000. Our mental health unit. So cancer center built on a parking lot, existing parking lot. So we're not cutting trees, not green space. To get the Act 250 review, $65,000 for the pleasure of the review. So if there's a way, and all that does is drive up costs. I mean, you know, we just parlay that into rate increases for people with commercial insurance. So there's got to be a way.
So like
to
everyone
do
in
these-
this room?
Yeah,
Okay,
correct.
sure.
Yeah. So I mean, there's got to be a way to be able to not only just review properties as if they're not just on greenfield, you know, be sensible about it, but also the review shouldn't cost developers an arm and a leg to be done.
And streamline it too. There's, you know, several, and I'm in real estate and development, there's several people that have come to me and said, what's with your state? I've never had anything like this in my entire life, and I've been doing this for 40 years. I think, and I'm not at all an expert on Act 250, I'm still learning it, but if it could be streamlined, and I loved your comment, customer service.
Right.
Like if it was looked at instead of like, we have to da-da-da, and looked at us, like, how can we make this win-win? How can we help these people? Like, okay, this is okay, but this part's not, so how can we fix this? So that would be the biggest thing I would take back at, you know, from trying to build housing solution and people trying to bring in businesses. You know, we have a really great opportunity at this Southern Vermont College, and I think it's been over a year now in the holdup of Act 250, and that's holding up jobs, it's holding up economic growth, it's holding up housing. So there's a lot of holdups, and not to mention these costs. I didn't realize it was that much. And that's a hospital.
The SBC campus development is an $80 million project.
Yeah.
Why it's being hung up is just beyond.
When our,
I mean, this would be so beneficial to a region that's seen economic stalemate for so many years. It's just, it's staggering. And I appreciate there's all kinds, you know, that's got green space, there's all kinds of things you want to protect there. But one of the Act 250 cycles of questions was held up for more than 6 weeks because they wanted to know the size of the root ball on the apple trees that we're going to plant. Okay, now seriously, I mean, that's not in statute, I don't believe.
That is
I'm fairly
absolutely awesome.
certain.
No, that is absolutely awesome. Who's your coordinator?
well, same,
Yeah,
So,
sounds familiar.
yeah, but
yeah. Well, and, you know, I'm glad we have someone here from appropriations, because our appropriations committee should be really concerned about this. You want to know how much money a car dealership brings in taxes every month? So much money in taxes that gets to go to funding the programs that we really want to fund. So that 2 years of waiting to expand that dealership, that's a lot fewer tax dollars that are coming in. Waiting to build housing, that's a lot fewer tax dollars that are coming in. The length of wait that is going on is not just causing frustration. It is costing the state of Vermont. I mean, our budget has grown significantly. The money coming in could be growing more if we were to allow these projects to happen and look at, okay, so we're talking 25 new employees, that's a lot per person. We're talking more car sales, we're talking more service sales. You know, how much is coming in for our education fund, for our general fund, for our transportation fund, which is in a real struggle bus right now because of these missed opportunities. And to build a new cancer unit on a parking lot, to redevelop a brownfield. I mean, that's sort of, we're literally losing the forest through the trees here of, okay, what do we actually want? And I think that's an important part of the big picture conversation that's been had around Act 250 of what is this actually supposed to be achieving and how do we do a better job of achieving it? And we just need to continue as we're working through the details, not to get lost on that, okay, every conversation to start with what are we trying to achieve and are we actually getting there? Because Kevin and I were just at a talk with the author from the book Abundance, and he talks about an everything bagel where it's like, well, the goal is to do this, but if we can do these 17 other things as well and promote all these other state goods, then that's even better. Like, well, but now you're not actually achieving. We want to build more housing. Yes, but we should also have the best energy codes in the nation. That person sleeping in a tent doesn't need the best energy codes right now. They need a place to live. That employee who's considering moving to Florida and just foregoing flood insurance, though they'd rather stay in Vermont, let's give them a house here because their ability to live through climate change is going to be better here than at that place in Florida. So that's sort of the big picture, but that's what we're going to be working on, and not just having these conversations with legislators, but having these conversations with the administration, with the folks heading up our agencies, where we see some of these challenges coming of saying you've got to work with the people within your agencies on how to have a culture of customer service, how regulation is meant to help create guidelines, but not stop progress from happening. So, just another little small item.
Just have to remember it's called Act 250 and the status quo is inaction.
Yeah.
I say you guys have it hardest. I hate to say this, you do have it hardest in this county. But this is where, there is some flexibility. So there are some places where it's like, yeah, the cost stinks, but you know what? It's pretty easy. It's predictable. It's got to be fair and predictable, regardless of where. It's a state program. Fair and predictable everywhere. That was actually on the banner of the website. And I was at a development conference, and I put that slide up, and all the developers had a good laugh. We had said, Natural Resource Board, fair and predictable. And they were like, oh. And so the remedy so far has been that they took that down. They're no longer there. I would love to make sure they put it back up and can really own and celebrate. It is fair, and it's predictable, and it's affordable. And if you're going to be doing a redevelopment project, we're going to say, how do we get to yes? Because we want that, not, all right, well, we're going to nickel and dime you on every opportunity we can. And these are tough conversations, right? Those fees that go into Act 50 allow for that board to, I don't know if it's self-sustaining, but it's more sustaining than it has to, we got to pick how are we going to fund right now. As we're sitting here, the emergency board is meeting. Those are the heads of all the money committees and the governor talking about what are we going to do when SNAP benefits get shut off in 2 days. And if the state has to make up that money, right, because we don't want families going to the grocery store and being told, sorry, you're going to have to put that cart of groceries away and figure out how you get through the next week if the feds don't reimburse us. It's going to be a really hard year, both on the taxing side and the spending side. It's going to be really tough for everyone. So we know those things like fees can be sort of justified in saying well, we need those fees to come in so that those employees are self-sustaining. But again, where are those fees being put in place? If we're doing a redevelopment project, how do we get to yes faster for those projects?
Want to talk about some other fun stuff? Yeah. So our next pillar is workforce and housing alignment. That was the impetus behind the economic action plan, to bring those conversations together, because too often there are housing conversations over here, workforce development over here, but they are interwoven. Because if we were to just increase our population without adding more housing, that would put more pressure on the housing market. Prices would go up. And I think we saw that to a small extent during the inbound migration that happened early in the pandemic. If we were to just increase housing without adding more working age people, that doesn't solve our workforce shortages. And prices might still go up too, because then with that shortage of workers, we might have to rely more on temporary or travel workers to fill gaps. They have to go in tandem. Right? This is the abundance agenda, to recognize that more houses, more people, that is the solution that drives affordability. In many of the pre-conversations we had before the formal program started, several of you said affordability, affordability, and affordability are the top priorities. Right? Vermont needs more people. That is the goal that we set in the economic action plan. And beyond just saying Vermont needs more people, we have data to actually quantify a number. When we take a look at the balance of people entering the workforce versus the people leaving the workforce, the annual gap that Vermont needs to try to fill is adding about 13,500 people into the workforce. Some of that can come from people who are here, right? Increasing efficiency, decreasing the barriers to labor force participation, but it has to be, again, efficiency and expansion. We have to grow the population too. So we set a goal of 802,000 by 2035, informed by that workforce gap, and yes, leaning into the area code, but it is with that long-term view of affordability and abundance. What makes me optimistic that we can achieve that? I said Vermont needs more people. The second half of that phrase is more people need Vermont. There is demand for Vermont. We actually see that reflected in our housing market, right? Price is an indicator of demand. Prices have been going up, meaning people want to stay here, people want to move here, and part of why prices are going up is we don't have enough supply. We can address that. So if we do both things in tandem, workforce and housing, we can become a much more abundant and affordable state. Now, there is a chart on the one-pager, looks like this, with some blue bars and green bars there. I'm going to retell the story of this chart using a sports analogy, because I find this really helpful in helping folks to understand sort of what we need to do from where we are. It's a very unbalanced chart. Let's pretend Vermont is a college sports team. So this is Team Vermont. Our workforce, so we have a lot of seniors who are going to be graduating from our team soon, right, retiring. And we need to do a little bit more work to recruit the next class of freshmen or transfer sophomores from other states. That's our challenge. Housing, those are the roster spots. So we can increase the roster spots by building more housing, and that allows us to be really good at the recruitment and attraction piece.
Kevin, Seth and I were talking earlier, and there's been an idea floating around for a while now about incentivizing seniors to sell their house to families and move out of the state. It would fix the demographics. It would provide housing.
This is not a position from the Vermont Chamber of Commerce. You can say that into the microphone.
I think it really is downsizing.
But some way to free up the seniors. Well, a lot of seniors are in houses they don't want to be in.
So I'll answer that from a data perspective and then hand it over to Megan to talk about the policy focus for the chamber. In 1970, the year that Act 250 was put in place, the median household size in Vermont was about 3.2 people per household. Today it's about 2.3, right? And part of that is this demographic shift of the state getting older. So let's say you had a family of 4, 2 adults, 2 kids, and maybe they purchased a 4-bedroom home. The kids have now grown up. We didn't build enough new houses, so the kids are either gonna stay at home with mom and dad, or they're moving away from their community because there are no new houses for them to move into, right? And then to your point, we have folks in the state who might be occupying a home that are larger than their current needs, and they might want to downsize, right? Some people want to stay put, but others might want to downsize. Without adding new housing stock, we don't have that mobility within the housing market to effectively use the housing we already have, right? So in order to solve this sort of stuck housing market where there isn't mobility, new housing stock is the answer, right? Essentially, if we were to play musical chairs right now, it'd be kind of boring because there are more chairs than people, and at the end of the day, everyone would have the right to sit. I want a really boring game of musical chairs in the housing market. But right now, if there are more people that want housing than housing available, then someone's left standing, whether it's out on the street or they're leaving Vermont. So from a data perspective, it's a supply issue. Yeah.
I'd love to provide the data point for that. It's 40,000 Vermonters aged 65 or older that currently live alone in a 2 or more bedroom house. There's a very wide angle, or a very wide margin in that statistic. Someone that's 65 in a 2-bedroom house, they are fine, they're not a problem, they're not the problem. But that also has the 85-year-old person in a 5-bedroom house that is just not taking care of it. So that's where that 40,000 unit number comes from, is we don't need to be adding 13,000 units a day, or a year, excuse me, because we don't know. And that's one of the big data points we don't know is in 20 years, do we need to replace 30 of those 40,000 houses or 2,000 of those 40 houses? We don't know.
And just to add to that point, that those seniors who are in that 5-bedroom house, they have an almost $0 property tax bill because it's being completely wiped out by the homestead adjustment. So you've got to think about that property then could be occupied by a family or a working couple who are contributing to the workforce and they are paying a full property tax bill, or you're now having somebody contributing nothing.
An anecdote to that exact point of mobility, which I didn't even consider because it's not my area. I tried moving here 2 years ago. I had to buy 3 homes to be able to move into one. And I didn't get the one that I wanted because the people couldn't sell it for the amount of money that they wanted, $160,000 over appraised value. And then we agreed to a term, but they couldn't find anywhere else to move, so they decided to stay there and cut me back a check for my deposit after I sold my house. And I had nowhere to live, so I stayed in an Airbnb for 6 weeks trying to find the next one. So there is I had no choice but to come here because my partner and I bought a business, right? It took me 3 homes in order to be able to move here, and I'm not of the beginning stages, right? And there's just not a lot out there. And I felt bad for those folks because they wanted just a condominium, they wanted to downsize, they had a house that's way too much than what they needed, they couldn't take care of it anymore, and they had no choice but to stay.
That's what I'm building. It was a 2-bedroom, 2-bath, 1-level living, and
Just say yes.
so if anybody wants
Better
to
do it.
invest,
Yeah.
we'll do some more. But I'm finding
Pass around the hat.
the reason I started to do that, as a couple of the realtors in the room, a lot of people want to stay in Vermont and they want to downsize, but there's not anything available for them. And we looked in the whole tri-state area for a year, couldn't find the right fit. And I said, okay, I'll just build it for you. So that's what started that. And then just today, I had 2 calls from people wanting to downsize. So now that creates, now you're freeing up housing because you're creating the seniors' homes that they want, that are more efficient, easier to handle, and the 1-level living. And then their house can now go on the market, and that opens that up for the family. So that's the
50-55
difference.
over housing is just like.
Someone in Rutland that did that, and then they got in trouble because it's not the older people buying the house. And they
Yeah.
can't say it's only for older people, because that goes against the
Right.
Yeah.
equality.
Well,
Fair housing.
That's why we need more
More.
chair, right?
Not
It's,
and if, it's
I think, our perspective is always going to be around the abundance versus scarcity. Not how do we kick the seniors out so that those homes are free, but how do we build more housing so if the seniors want to stay, they can, right? Because they're important parts of our communities. It's, whether it's that library employee just left to work in a child care center, but we've got great volunteers who are retired who now want to work in our library. So, all right, we can keep going. How do we make sure that every member of Vermont, every person in Vermont is valued here? And it can be scary being a senior citizen living in that 5-person bedroom, but this is where all your friends are. This is where your community is, and you don't want to leave. My grandmother was living in an independent living situation with like a music room, and I was like, how long do I have to wait before this is my jam? Like, I have played bingo and charade. I'm here for this. But this was not in Vermont. Like, where are we doing that?
To that point, is there any conversation about doing that kind of south, mid, and north? Because the population is going to continue to get older.
Well, we have to make it affordable for the developers to do that. And we have to make it reasonable. I live in a town that just created a new town plan, and inclusion, all the buzzwords are on this new town plan. It is so sexy with all the words. But then you dig down into it, and the proposed new senior housing development that the folks in town were coming together to build went to the DRB and said, well, you're saying the building can't be bigger than this size. That means to make this work, we have to do 2 buildings. So that means we have to have 2 elevator systems. Do you know how many elevator repair operators are in Vermont?
3.
You know how much you can charge when you're for an entire state? I know of one, but
It might be the other one is nearby in Albany.
yeah, probably. So, all of a sudden, you put the right words down, but then you've put so many restrictions on that large project for senior housing in my community. The folks who were putting that together were just like, we can't you do like all of the setbacks that you've put in, all of these, this is how it has to look. Like, this is not inclusive anymore. We can't do it. And so, how are we also, like my town, saying, you know what? This is not an inclusive plan, and here, if you want to be getting all of these state dollars, you want to be getting, these type of regulations are not going to be helpful. I happen to live in a town that has a long history of creating regulation that says no in new and interesting ways. So this is our latest new and interesting way of saying no. But it takes us really getting engaged, I think, at the state level, but also at the local level, and having those conversations about what does it mean to get to yes, and what does that look like, and who are we preserving Vermont for? Who are we leaving out when we say, well, it has to look like this and it has to be preserved in this way? Okay, well, who was left out when we came up with that idea? Who was not included in our community at that point? And by preserving this, are we continuing to be exclusionary, which is not going to help us in a prosperous future?
So
We're
Jen,
digressing a little bit.
Can we have your phone number so when Cat TV shows this in your statement, all the people we can send you a direction?
I'm not suggesting it's a good idea. What I'm suggesting is that we have to think about ways to incentivize seniors to free up housing, because I don't think with the current build cycle we can build sufficiently. And we know so many seniors that would love to give up their family home, but financially it doesn't make sense because they're either no taxes, they have no mortgage on it, they have nothing, so their cost of living is super, super low. So they're not going to give it up. So we've got to think of some way to incentivize it. And the second part is really kind of a little bit of tongue-in-cheek with regards to the demographics that was described. But the idea was to try to get a conversation going about, is there a way to set policy in a way that incentivizes seniors to free up housing?
And I think part of that is by allowing
Other
development to happen
Fair enough.
where our seniors would say, like, I could see myself here. All right, this isn't what those things work.
Piggyback on that, I'm a realtor, I work with Lily and Maple Leaf Realty, and I was thinking about that too, like I had some seniors recently that weren't looking for another house to downsize to, they already had a ranch. They were like, we just want to be in a condo, we want
Right.
something easy.
Snow-studded
News or
golf
somewhere
carts?
was a 2-year wait. They were like, we need to sell now, what are we gonna do? My family's here, we wanna stay here. And they were like, I guess we're gonna move in the basement of our kids for now. I mean, like seniors. And I was like, oh my God. But they were like homeless, like they didn't have a place to go. So there's that. And then I was also thinking about the like 5-bedroom houses that are falling apart that the 85-year-old person, because we deal with that. And I'm like, how can we make it easier for buyers with like their loan programs? So like the FHA, USDA, they have such tight restrictions. So someone can afford a house, but then they're like, oh, it needs, it's got lead-based paint in it, and there's always like something
right,
that's
these are
keeping
those
them.
regulatory pieces
Because they're
that
gonna
just
have
keep
to
adding
do
up.
work to it, so.
Well,
yeah,
and
to
this
make
is
it
where
easier for them.
programs like VHIP, the Vermont House Rental, it's VHIP, but there's an R in there.
Vermont Housing Improvement.
One of those silent R's, Vermont Rental Housing Improvement Program, has been great in some of these big houses of saying, you know what, not many people actually want a 5-bedroom house anymore. Can we use VHIP, which is between $30,000 and $50,000, to help the developer get this project done, to say, let's take that 5-bedroom house and turn it into a 2-bedroom condo and a 3-bedroom condo. The senior can stay in that first floor 2-bedroom condo, and you have a whole new home, right? When we're talking about units, we're talking about homes for Vermonters, new Vermonters by choice or Vermonters by birth, to stay in. So programs like VHIP can go a long way, can really stretch those state dollars for that like per unit bang for the buck. We have concerns. There's a proposal that I know is coming that will increase the tax on lodging establishments for affordable housing projects. I might be able to get some lodging folks behind that if we were going to solve the housing crisis with it. But right now it's costing $600,000. $600,000 to build a 1 to 2 bedroom apartment for an income restricted unit of housing. I'm not on board with saying, yes, lodging, you should be paying more taxes so that another 50 houses, not 50 houses, 50 1 to 2 bedroom apartments that are income restricted. So right, like again, we're putting someone in income restricted housing. If we're not building other types of housing, then they're stuck, right? How do I move up? We've got to solve that problem. Why is it costing $600,000 per unit before we just, this gets to that fiscal responsibility, before we just say, let's spend more money, let's raise more taxes. We've got to get to the root cause of the problems and really address solving them.
Yeah, Representative Greer.
Yeah, I'm just, one thing that I'm hearing a lot about, wanting to, give up seniors that are living in their homes. One thing that I feel like has been left out of that is home sharing arrangements. I think I'm probably the only legislator that actually has a home sharing arrangement right now. And that's something, it's one of the lowest barriers to entry for someone young that wants to stay in Vermont, that has employment, to be able to get them into some kind of housing. And what it really does more than anything is build community. I mean, my home sharing arrangement should have expired a long time ago, and yet I'm still there. And actually, I have found apartments that I could go to, but I don't want to give up that community that I've built with really my best friend in the world. So I just want to throw that out there. And I know my legislative colleagues know that. I've been trying to search for ways to, make home sharing, at least it's not going to be the end-all solution.
But we need every tool
but at
in the
least
toolbox.
it's one of the.
There's no silver bullet to solve our housing crisis. We need all of the tools.
So I was thinking a lot about a close family of ours who, the elderly parent wanted to give up the housing, a grandparent wanted to give up the housing. The couple couldn't find a house, so that's how they solved the young couple starting their family together. Grandma moved out and actually stayed with them for a little while. Well, she tried to find this housing that didn't exist. She got on a list, the cost was where she could find, the cost was really high. And so she ended up moving into the parents' home and stayed there until the point that she needed care, which then turned into another issue, which there's not enough care to take care of the elderly here, especially for families that are trying to keep their parents close. And sorry if you have different feelings about that, but so it's kind of interesting listening to the stories today, thinking about what my friends just went through, trying to take care of all different levels of their family, and they weren't very connected to a lot of resources, so it was quite a struggle for them and quite a hardship on them throughout this whole process. But all these things happened to them, which, by the way, has now led me to find my senior housing while I'm still working, as compared to waiting until I'm a senior. But I think that it's just interesting, but it's just not one little thing that we can fix. There's a lot of pieces
That's right.
to make all these things happen.
Yeah.
On the flip side, back to your first pillar, the child care tax.
Yeah.
That same family has benefited from not having to leave, one of them having to leave the workforce because they had the second child. So they got so much help by having the second child that it actually improved their situation versus having one child or that. Child care, so yeah.
That's great, and I think that's important feedback, and sort of what are the programs that we've put in place, and how are they working, right? Like we need to, when we start something new, it can sort of be like, okay, great, we checked the box, we did that, let's move on. But like, okay, let's see how is the payroll tax for childcare working for families? We hear from some employers that it doesn't work because their employees can't find housing in Vermont, so they live in another state and they're paying the payroll tax, and they're like, well, I don't get any. I don't get the subsidies for this. Why do I have to pay this tax? Or saying, I'm in a rural area and the rural childcare provider that I relied on is no longer deemed high quality. So I have to go to center care, and that's not what I want for my family. So just some of that feedback, but then also we now get the subsidies, and our center has expanded, and so we can have multiple kids and we can both stay in the workforce. Like, we need all of those stories to really do that check-in. How is this working for businesses? How is it working for families? Are there tweaks that need to be made? When we make these massive bills, there are going to be tweaks that need to be made or changes that need to be made to to make sure they're working as well as they can be.
And I think your point about the shared living, where my son-in-law comes from, Vancouver, Canada, I mean, that's the way the families grow there, is the whole compound living is just, I mean, I don't know if that's something we're seeing. I know there was the ADU grant, and there was some stories about families that found ways to live together and help each other by mom and dad moving into the more ready unit and meeting the income requirements, but I don't know how that's working, that program in the state.
I think it's working well, and the ADU program and the VHIP program are together. So the outcomes that we're seeing there are sort of combined, but also there's a manufactured home program to say, you know, there's some people who don't want to live in an apartment, and if they can live in a manufactured home and have, you know, their own four walls, that there are incredible improvements that have been made to manufactured homes or mobile homes. And so how do we ensure, you know, using the same type of program, that those are up to date and they're safe to live in? Because I think we just need choice, right? And so what are the barriers that are keeping people from creating those choices for people to live here? But it is a two-sided coin. We need homes. We also need people. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. We can't just do one and then say, well, we built these houses and nobody wants to be here anymore. That's not the problem we have right now, but we also need to do more. How are we aligning our programs for workforce, our educational programs, to make sure that what the educational programs are doing are actually providing the outcomes that our businesses need, and that provide really great opportunities for the youth that are in Vermont, because we don't have a lot of them, but we need to do as good a job as we can in keeping them. And we actually do a great job of importing people into our college system. So if we're importing them, how can we keep them?
Yeah.
We're working with a group called the Strata Educational Foundation, who's doing some pretty incredible data research on this, on how are states faring in this. When you're graduating with a bachelor's degree, what's the ROI in Vermont versus the ROI in Kentucky? And why is there the difference? We're doing really well on associate's degrees. If you graduate in Vermont with an associate's degree, the return on investment is fantastic. Bachelor's is...
Than your college graduate telling you that, oh, wow, after you just paid for 4 years of college, I could have done this with an associate's degree.
What I learned is that what the parents find the value of college to be is based on the job that comes after. Like, well, that's what our administrators need to be thinking too. So we're working with the Strata Educational Foundation on some of their data tracking around that. Where are we doing well and where do we need to improve? I'm hoping we can maybe get them into our education committees to sort of talk about that work this year. But I'm going to jump to you guys in just one second. I just want to say a few more things. Part of what we're also need to do is, when you show up at the State House every day, there's a lot of task force study committees that come out, and so you sort of get put on a lot of them. So in any given week, I'm on a healthcare transformation study committee. I'm on the freight rail advisory committee. You probably didn't even know there was freight rail advisory committee. There is, and I'm on it. I'm on a number of committees, and I will tell you, every committee, part of what they're talking about is a workforce training program. Everyone is like, I know what we're going to do about our lack of staff. We're going to have the best workforce training program out there. Like, okay, great. There are 5,300 graduating seniors from high school, and there are 17.5 thousand people retiring. We don't just need to train them really well, we need to put people through that program. So looking at some data input to say, okay, if you want to have this great training program for people to work in freight and logistics, where are there not enough jobs in that we can say, hey, come to Vermont, we have a great training program, and we're building housing, and so you can set your life up here. So I think we need to continue to work on what do employers need from training programs, what are the training programs providing, and then how do we do a better job incentivizing people through them? Not just from Vermont, how do we keep all those Vermonters here, but then how do we look in a really smart way, not sort of a blanket way of saying, okay, where are they either graduating people from tech centers and other high schools around the country where there are fewer opportunities than there are people interested in that, that we can pull from, so that we can fill up some of these great training programs and get the workforce that we need.
If the state needs help with the data on that marketing strategy, I know a guy. Yeah, I think I saw a hand here and then in the back, and then we do have one more pillar to cover.
Just quickly to speak to Kelly's point about the child care tax, beyond my role at the chamber, I'm also the board chair of a local early education center. And that tax has helped. Subsidy always had kind of a bad connotation to it, but all but 2 families receive some level of subsidy in our center versus the revamping of that whole structure where it was about 50%. So we've seen a huge uptick in families taking advantage of that. The one feedback that we receive at the center from families is the process to constantly have to keep uploading pay stubs. So what ends up happening is people don't reapply, and then they can't afford the cost because they haven't applied for the subsidy, and it becomes a vicious cycle. So one just piece of feedback would be the process of reapplying for subsidy is a little bit clunky to families.
Okay. Yeah. Paperwork process is, so this is one of those where we can call the agency and say, what's happening here? We need to make this easy for people to use, because having 2 children under the age of 5 is challenging enough as it is.
I saw a hand in the back, and then we'll transition to our last.
I just wanted to make a real quick blanket statement over the whole conversation we were just having. It's something I noticed that on an individual level, I think we all hit pretty well, but when we all come together and then legislature happens, we kind of miss it. And that's the longevity of X, Y, and Z program, initiative, whatever. Like the ADU thing that went around, love it. Great on paper, great idea, and they're even gonna make a lot of it, it has to be affordable. Also, awesome. But it only has to be affordable for 5 years, and then you can do whatever the heck you want with it. Kind of counterproductive at a certain point. So longevity of these projects should be.
Well, there's balance, right? Because if you say this has to be income sensitized indefinitely, that developer starts to say, okay, how long is this, you're gonna give me $10,000 and I'm gonna put restrictions on this for, on how much I can charge. When does that benefit no longer play out? And then what happens when I sell my place and there's this restriction on it? I can tell you that how long those type of affordability clauses are put on with state funding get a lot of conversation in the State House. There's a lot of debate about how long, what is the right amount of time, because you've got to make sure that the benefit for someone to actually do this, say, you know what, I used to have long-term renters, and then I had that one renter who never left and they destroyed my property. I guess I could do it again. I'm gonna get that help from the state. That'll help me get it over the finish line. But if it's got to be in perpetuity, I can't commit to that. Right. So those conversations do happen, but there is a conversation included in that. And at some point, that benefit that you've gotten from the state is worth 5 or 10 years before you just say, you know what, I'm just going to build market rate somewhere else.
So really appreciate the robust discussion and all the ideas that were brought up. Selfishly, I'll say, check out the Economic Action Plan to just familiarize yourself with a lot of the other really good ideas that the Chamber will be helping to advance in terms of policy. I want to also thank Rep. Greer for sharing the home share perspective. I'll point out page 42 and 43. So home share is actually highlighted on page 43. 42 shows that over a quarter of the costs of housing are from regulation. So with that, I'll transition to our final pillar, on industry competitiveness. So CNBC does an annual top states for business rankings, and they've honed their methodology over the years. And with any sort of rankings, there's always going to be questions over like, oh, is this the right metric? Is it weighted properly? But it is something that states refer to when thinking through how competitive are they. Vermont ranks 38th right now in terms of top states for business. We're number 1 in terms of the CNBC rankings for quality of life. We're ranked pretty well in terms of education. Where we do poorly is across almost every economic factor. That is where there's a great opportunity, right? Because we already established there's demand for Vermont. People want to be here. Part of that is the quality of life, but there has to be the viability. There has to be the affordability. There has to be economic opportunity and mobility. And when we think about the affordability equation again, I mentioned there's a lot of focus on wages. One way that we can increase or improve wages is through growth, supporting business growth. When we take a look at the data in terms of earnings or wages that are paid to employees, there's a clear correlation between the size of a firm and wages that they pay. As firms grow, wages go up. So supporting business success also supports employee wages. Where we have seen growth in terms of Vermont's GDP is in industries like education, healthcare, government as a proportion of the overall GDP, while sectors like manufacturing and tourism have been decreasing as a percentage of the overall. Those are the industries that are importing dollars, right? Manufacturing, creating goods, exporting those goods and importing dollars into the economy. Tourism, consumer spending from visitors, that brings new money into the economy. So when we take a look at positioning Vermont for long-term economic vitality, we have to support the industries that are helping to bring new dollars into the state. And with that, I'll pass it over to Megan to talk about industry competitiveness.
So we, obviously there are a lot of issues that impact businesses, as we've been talking a lot about today. And sometimes I think business loses that, because we're so focused on things like we got to have housing, we got to do workforce training. I think the business community really cares about its employees. And so there's a lot of focus on how do we help our employees have the best life they can have. And so that's where we put a lot of focus. But we also are focused on how do we help your businesses grow, be economically viable in the state. And so what are those things that are specific about how we improve the quality of doing business in Vermont? Or at least maintain the quality if we're not, if we're just fighting for what we have. And so, we had some policy retreats this year, which were great, where we brought some members together and legislators to talk about, what are some of the challenges that your business is facing, and what are some reasonable and actionable things that we could work on together to make progress. And I think the reasonable and actionable piece is important, right? Because we know this is going to be a brutal budget year. I do not envy Representative Nigro on appropriations. It is going to be a brutal education year. Don't envy Senator Bongartz. There's a lot of really high pressure things going on in the state. So we're not going to come in and say, we want this big, new, expensive program. That's not going to be reasonable, and it is definitely not going to be actionable. But what are things that we can do to support the business community? One is allowing the business community to continue to use important marketing tools that we have now to, again, import that money. And that's through supporting really strong data privacy law for the state that does not inhibit businesses from actually doing the work of digital marketing. And we have member support to have Josh Diamond working with us on that issue. It has been a contentious issue, and I will tell you, the businesses of Bennington County have been at the forefront of that issue and talking, sometimes in challenging ways, about why digital marketing is so critical to success. With a state that has 600,000 people, the ability to use digital marketing is really important. And there have been some challenging conversations around that, and we're so appreciative of the Bennington community and businesses for really standing up on that. I'm going to let Josh talk for a few minutes about what some of our work is there, and then we'll keep talking.
Yeah. Thank you, Megan. I'm Josh Diamond. I'm with the Dinsey Law Firm up in Burlington. I've been practicing law for about 30 years, and for most of that time, I've been representing businesses with regulatory compliance, dealing with consumer protection laws, and as that intersects with technology. I had a break from that, though. In 2017, TJ Donovan got elected Attorney General and gave me the opportunity to serve as his deputy. And even while working with TJ, we were able to work on these issues about helping consumers with consumer protection in the digital world, digital privacy, but also finding that balance with the business community so we could create important consumer protections, but do it in a way that created a culture of compliance for businesses so they had that regulatory predictability, they knew what their obligations were, and they weren't going to be subject to gotcha enforcement. So we're now in this environment. We've probably all heard the stories about I'm surfing. I bought a season's pass at Cochrane Ski Area, that little ski area up in Richmond, Vermont. And all of a sudden I'm getting all these pop-up ads for stuff like go to Denver and go to these high-end resorts. Why would they have these pop-up ads? Or other examples might be a situation where you get a letter in the mail that says, oh, someone had gotten to our systems and they may have gotten your personal data. But I've never done business with this company. Why would this be of concern to me? And so there is a need, and hats off to the Chamber and the business community for recognizing that there is a need for enhanced consumer protections, but we got to do it in a way that is predictable, that's achievable, and that's consistent with the regulatory models across the nation. 19 states have comprehensive data privacy laws, and in New England, we've got 3 states that have essentially created a model. New Hampshire, Connecticut, and Rhode Island have almost identical laws. There's some minor differences. And so what we thought was, let's go to the Vermont legislature and say, we want to be responsible. We want to have our ability to do the digital marketing that is really essential for the 21st century health of our businesses, but we want to give consumers reasonable protections. And so we put forth a bill, and I want to thank Senator Baumgartz and his colleagues in the Senate who passed this model legislation that's based upon other states, which I'll talk about in a minute, to create that balance of meaningful consumer protections, but in a way that's achievable and creates an environment of regulatory predictability for the business community. The problem is that bill is now stuck in the House Commerce, and there are not necessarily, there's a few folks who want to see Vermont be a leader in the nation and have their own specially crafted data privacy bill that creates obligations that are different than any other state in the nation, which require businesses to figure out how are we going to comply when we don't have a model to look at in other states, as well as subject businesses to what's called a private right of action. So not only does the Vermont Attorney General's office have the ability to enforce the consumer protection laws, but if I'm an enterprising plaintiff's lawyer, and there's nothing wrong with plaintiff's lawyers, they serve an important purpose and need in our communities, but instead of really helping someone who needs, who's been harmed, I'm going to kind of craft this nice class action, and I'm going to take advantage of these statutory penalties and make a lot of money. So what does the bill that the Senate passed do? It conveys 5 really important rights that have been recognized across the country for consumers. One is, if you are a business that transacts in data of a certain threshold, and this bill would be 100,000, so you got to be a big business. You got to have 100,000 consumer touch points here in Vermont. Then you got to tell consumers whether or not, if asked, whether they have your data. And if they have your data and the consumer asks for a copy of it, you got to provide it. And if the consumer says, I don't want you to have my data, and delete it, then you got to delete it. And if there are inaccuracies, you got to correct those inaccuracies. And if you don't want those pop-up ads, the direct marketing ads, you have the ability to say, I want to opt out. That's pretty common across the country. But other aspects are, if you're that business that has that data or you're processing that data, they're not always the same things. You may be a business that has a lot of information in your systems, but you hire out a third party to do the marketing. You got to minimize that data so that you're not selling that data to third or fourth parties without some notice to consumers. So as a company that might be subject to this Senate legislation, you have to do a privacy statement. You got to tell consumers, and you can post it on your website, we collect this data and this is what we do with it. So that people have notice and they can then exercise their rights. And if I buy that season's pass to the Cochrane ski area, and you know what, I think I'm okay if they sell that data or they share that data with other like organizations, maybe the US Olympic team, because I want to support their activities. That's okay, but I still have the right to say no. You can do that if I give informed consent. So a reasonable balance, right? We know what the requirements are. We create notice, and we have to live with those four walls, if you will, four corners of that notice. Well, the opponents to this bill want to create obligations that go beyond that. So they say, first of all, we don't want just large businesses to be part of this regulatory construct. We want businesses as small as 6,850 touch points. So if you're a small business, right, it could be a local business here, local car dealership, or maybe even a nonprofit, and you've got data points of 6,850 consumers, then you're going to fall within this new regulatory construct. That could be really burdensome for a new startup. The second thing is that duty of minimization. Well, we know what it is because we had to put out a policy. I'm the business, I'm defining what my obligations are. The opponents to this bill would say, no, that's not enough. You need to get into the head of the consumer and figure out what the consumer believes is a reasonable line from the product that they're purchasing or the service that they're getting. What is data minimization? Well, who knows what that line is, right?
Those plaintiff attorneys, they know.
And then you combine that with a private right of action. So we're hoping that the Vermont legislature can support the Senate bill, create meaningful protections for consumers, but at the same time recognize that it has to be a balance. We need to create a culture of compliance. We can't set up businesses to fail. By giving them a framework by which they can live with, they can look at other states that have similar language on these very technical requirements and see what Connecticut, see what Rhode Island, see what New Hampshire is doing. And let's get something done. Let's help businesses have an environment that respects privacy, that allows you to do the digital marketing that you need, give consumers meaningful protections, but let's not create a gotcha enforcement environment that really creates a disincentive for businesses, 21st century businesses, to come here into Vermont and do business.
So actionable, right? The Senate already passed it, unanimously passed it. This should be something we can move on. I know we're out of time. Two other quick actionable. They're so small that we're just the Green Mountain Retention Program. This gives graduates from college, bachelor's or master's degree, $5,000 to stay in Vermont. If we have the best return on investment for associate's degrees, why aren't we letting our associate degree graduates, why aren't we enticing them to stay with that? You know, we need to, I think, a little equity in how that program is administered, and saying graduates of any level that are going to be that have taken on debt for their certification for their associate's degree should have that same access that someone with a master's degree has. So we're going to be asking for an expansion of that program. It's not new money, but using the money that's there. And looking at our state's business incentive program, this says, you know, the state will provide you some funds, refund some money if you grow. Right now, that's just for job growth. We're really struggling with people, and that program is underused. Where we know there is benefit is also in automation. We can keep jobs that we have here if we automate. automating in Vermont isn't about losing jobs, it's about improving jobs. So how can we better incentivize businesses to put down literal roots with machinery, equipment that allows them to stay and grow here? We hope you stay in touch with us throughout the session. If you're a Vermont Chamber member, you get our newsletter on Fridays that says, here's what's been going on in all the committees, here are the things you care about. If you're reading something in there and you're like, what is that? Call our team. We're here to talk to you. And if you're a Southwestern Vermont Chamber member, you get that on Monday because of this great partnership. So you might get it Friday and Monday, you might just get it on Monday, but either way, if you're in this room, you're gonna get that information, and please reach out to our team to ask us about any of these topics. If you want to testify, if you want to write a letter, if you want to be involved, or you just have questions, we're here for you.
Great. Thank you, Megan, Kevin, and I also want to thank again Maru and the Country Club and the great meal we had today. So a round of applause. A couple of final comments and then we'll get you on your way. Megan mentioned Mondays matter. Mondays do matter. We want you to kick off the week with legislative updates and business and economic updates. So that'll be back in action. You know, every now and then we do a special one. We'll do a special one based on this conversation, but that'll be back in action in January when the session starts. And so weekly we give you updates on that. And we've gotten great responses from that newsletter. The other thing I'll mention, I think it was an expansion strategy number 1, but we do have Luis here on our team. He's part of the GROW Relocation Retention Program. This chamber was renewed again for 2 more years through that grant and maybe beyond. And so we're very excited about that. If you have not met Luis, please get in touch with him. As a member of this chamber, you have some point of access with him. And that leads me into our final discussion, which is all of you got your membership renewal letters and packets just recently. And so a whole new membership model. I think we've been preaching it for the last year. If there are questions on that membership model, Eric and myself have made ourselves available. Please, you know, this is a partnership with all of you. This was a model built by members. We had committees come together and decide what benefits mattered most, how to kind of equitably give that out. And so it was a membership model for members, built by members. And part of the upper range of that membership model has concierge service with Luis and myself to help you recruit. And I'll always use the example because Tom D brought it up in one of the committee meetings, was around the hospital. Matt, I can attract the doctors. I have a whole recruitment team on doctors. It's their spouses I have to get to move here. Could you and your team help show those spouses around to the community, the farmer's market, the whatever, to make them fall in love with Bennington or Manchester? And we'll take care of the doctors. And so as you look at that membership model, that might also be attractive as we talk about expansion strategy and obviously you know, just the general effort of Luis in attracting all the families here. So we're very excited about that. And then I'll wrap up with be on the lookout for our membership survey in November. So we always do State of the Commerce in the summer, lets us know about the economy. But the November survey is very important because it lets us know how we're doing, and we can take that back to our board members and we can kind of give a grade on that. But also, and very important, and Eric and I talk a lot about this, and the rest of our team, it also lets us know what to do next year. Okay, so if this was very attractive, Matt, we want more access to things like this. Okay, let's go build more access to that. If we want more deep dives or more training on AI or more staff training, leadership, whatever that happens to be, the November survey is a great place to let Eric and myself know what you want for next year. And with that, we'll get everybody on their way, and happy hump day.